Hindu nor the word India have Indian origin. This is important to understand. Let me give you a general background of that for a few moments. There is a river called Sindhu, which was the dividing river between the Persian empires and the Indian kingdoms. And even now, I have many Persian friends. If you ask them to pronounce Sindhu, they always pronounce this as a Hindu. Somehow sa is pronounced as ha in Persian, for whatever reason that I don't know. So for them, that river was called Hindu. And therefore the other side is Hindustan, meaning the land on the other side of the Hindu. So Hindustan then becomes the land where those people who live there, they are the Hindus. Then when this word was, the word Hindu from Persian was written into Greek, later the letter H is written, but usually it's not pronounced. So it gets called Indus River. So there is a river in English, you will find Indus River, from which we get the word India. Then in I'm not exactly sure whether it was 1871 or 1881. In any case, when the English were ruling India, they had a general census. From their point of view, it was very important to have religious divisions, so they wanted everybody to write on their what is their religion, are they Hindus or Christians or Muslims. Then the question was, what is a Hindu? Nobody even now is able to define what is a Hindu, because from the so-called Hindu perspective, what they refer to their religion is Sanatana Dharma, which means eternal law. It is not based on any particular great figure. There is no shortage of great sages in India, but the Hinduism is not based on any particular person like Christ or Abraham or Moses or Prophet Muhammad, nor is it based on any particular idea. The call is Sanatana Dharma, eternal law. And therefore, so the British now, of course, wanted to define what is a Hindu. This is the British definition of what is a Hindu. A Hindu is an Indian who is not a Christian nor a Muslim. And you may be surprised that it is still in the Constitution of India, because they basically just took over all the things from the British. So according to the Constitution of India, a Hindu is an Indian who is not a Christian nor a Muslim. Therefore, naturally, all the Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs, they are all Hindus, constitutionally. And occasionally, particularly about 30 odd years ago, there was a very strong movement to start a whole different country based on Sikhs called Khalistan. And so therefore they wanted to have separation from the so-called Hindus. But that would require to change the constitution in India, which requires 2/3 majority. It will almost never happen. Or it might happen sometimes if some party really wins many, many seats. But so I am inviting you to realize that so-called the word Hindu means nothing from the perspective of the Indians. Just geographical location got attached to it from the Persian point of view. Later on, the river Sindhu became Indus River, from which we go to India, etc. And so Hindu is a Christian, an Indian who is not a Christian, not a Muslim. So there you are. But on the other hand, there is hardly any shortage of great sages in India throughout large history. And strictly speaking, from the so-called Sanatana Dharma perspective, anybody who connects with this highest reality is a Hindu. So Christ is a Hindu, Rumi is a Hindu. If any of these great sages have connected with the eternal law, they are a Hindu. This will be their perspective. So from the perspective of so-called Hinduism, because that's the word now we end up using it, so recently actually there has been even a movement in India to remove the word India. Even the Constitution of India begins, the very opening line in the Constitution of India is, India, that is Bharat. Bharat is the traditional name of India. But nobody outside India seems to know this name. But you see the same kind of difficulty with some other names, like for example what we call Germany. The German people don't call it Germany. Do you want to say?
What popped into my mind, Christopher Columbus was looking for India. When he found this place, he called the indigenous people Indians.
Yes.
And that stuck.
Yes. Yes. But in any case, having said what I just said, it is certainly true that all of these various different aspects of now what we might call Hinduism, or even different religions like Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, all of them deeply subscribe to the idea of reincarnation. And the Bhagavad Gita is the locus classicus of the whole idea of reincarnation. There is not that much emphasis on it in the Rig Veda. So let me begin with this remark where you would see, death is certain for one who is born. Who could disagree with this? But the next one, and rebirth is certain for one who dies. Now how do we know this? But this is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. The beginnings of all beings are unmanifest, and they are unmanifest again in their end, O Arjuna. Only their middle states are manifest. Just in case, I'm assuming that most of you have at least some brief introduction to the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, is there anybody who wants me to say a few words about this, or is it? Do you want me to? Okay. Arjuna, by the way, is regarded as the most highly regarded warrior. In fact, even now in India, the government of India has something called Arjuna Rewards, which are for, they now honor the athletes rather than the warriors. But Arjuna is one of the brothers of a group called Pandavas. In the whole of Indian mythology, not only, this is story from the Mahabharata. Bhagavad Gita is one of the books in the large context of Mahabharata, which is a great epic. But in all Indian mythological stories, the battle is never between us and them. The battle is always between us one and us two. This is important to realize that it's not, because the fundamental idea that the whole universe is inside us and the struggle is within ourselves. Struggle isn't with somebody else out there. And so even the mythological stories, you can look at any story from India and you will find, so in this case, a battle, I don't want to go into the details of it, but battle has become more or less inevitable, but they are cousins going to fight with each other. Pandavas are the 5 brothers, the other side are called Kauravas, don't worry about the names. They have actually hundreds of brothers. And their main brother is Duryodhana, and Arjuna is not the oldest of the 5 Pandavas, but he is regarded as the greatest warrior. So Arjuna and Duryodhana, because the battle is about to begin, in spite of the fact that many people, including Krishna, has tried to stop this battle, so they both go around all the neighboring kings asking them for help in the battle. And from their perspective, Krishna is also just one of the ordinary kings in the kingdom around them. This is a very important feature also, that to know the real nature of somebody else, first of all, I need to know the real nature of myself. So there are only 2 people in the whole of the Mahabharata, large text, who know the real nature of Krishna. Others don't know his real nature. and they just think he's just an ordinary king in an ordinary kingdom. So both of them go to ask for his help. Krishna, as is very Indian context, is just lying, having some rest. See, in the Western world, if somebody is sitting down, we say, come on, do something. In India, if somebody is doing something, come on, come sit down. It's a very different attitude. So Krishna is just resting, and Arjuna goes and sits near his feet out of respect, and Duryodhana sits near his head. So when Krishna opens his eyes, he first sees Arjuna. And maybe I should also take a little slight footnote here. This is coming from my academic background. Krishna literally means dark. Contrary to the overall Western idea in which dark is associated with evil and light or brightness is associated with goodness. In India, dark is associated with depth. No plant, nothing can grow on the surface. It has to grow in the depth. So Krishna literally means dark. It also has another root for its word, karshati, which literally means one who draws you deeply. What is your deepest attraction? So Krishna has these two meanings. Arjuna literally means pale or white. Arjuna and Krishna are representing two levels of oneself. They are both in us. This is why I repeatedly keep saying it's not a battle out there. It could possibly have been a historical battle. But according to all the sages in India, this is an internal battle, that's the issue. This is an internal teaching, that's the issue here. It's not a battle out there. But in any case, so Krishna sees Arjuna first, and then he gives both of them this choice. One of them can have all his armies, chariots, weapons, everything, and the other side can have him alone. And in this particular battle, he would not pick up any weapons. Krishna is not against picking up weapons, but in this battle, he will not pick up any weapons. Now, what would a sensible person do? What do you think? But Arjuna chooses Krishna. Duryodhana is delighted. Now he has all the armies and all the weapons, etc. So Arjuna has, what is Krishna going to do? So he asks him to become the charioteer of Arjuna in the battle. And then he asks his charioteer to take the chariot between the two armies so he can see who he has to fight. So the first chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is almost wholly, there are 18 chapters. The first chapter is almost wholly dedicated to describing various kind of weapons, various kind of warriors doing this or that, chariots. But one needs to realize some people actually therefore think that the Bhagavad Gita is meant to just initiate battle. This is completely silly. Once a big metaphor is chosen, for example, Teresa of Avila chooses the metaphor of climbing up a mountain. So then you can't use a chariot. You need different kind of metaphors completely. So sometimes we have metaphors like crossing the ocean. So depending on the major metaphor that is chosen, all the other things follow from it. Not to imagine, but I often remind people, if there were a few writers were sitting in a library having a writer's chaos, then Krishna won't say therefore fight, he would say therefore write. But the rest of the Bhagavad Gita will be exactly the same. It's only the first chapter which will be different, which is just describing. So don't get too occupied with the particular metaphor, but in any case, so then Arjuna has a crisis of conscience because he has to fight his own cousins, his own teachers, because his major teacher of weaponry, now this is another ironic thing that I should remind you, one gets too stuck with this caste business. In the whole of the Mahabharata, the two spiritual teachers are of Kshatriya origin, meaning warrior class, Krishna and Bhishma. And the teacher of weaponry is a Brahmin, Dronacharya. So don't get too stuck on this caste business, it all goes on, many things are changing. So then the crisis that Arjuna has is precisely to do with how can I fight my own cousins or my own teachers. He says this is against family dharma. The word dharma is the very first word actually in the Bhagavad Gita. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyotsava. The blind king, who is the overall king, remember, according to the sages, it's an internal metaphor. I am blind to my own kingdom, therefore unable to engage in the battle. But he has somebody, one of his charioteer, who temporarily has occult clairvoyance and clairaudience. He can see at a distance, hear at a distance. So Sanjay is his name. We don't get worried about that. So he's asking Sanjay that in the field of dharma, in the field of action, what did my sons and my nephews do? So dharma is the very first word in the Bhagavad Gita. And in fact, towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna even says to Arjuna, have you listened to our dialogue about dharma carefully? So it is said to be a dharma, that whole book of dharma. But dharma is very impossible to translate by one word. It can mean responsibility, it can mean duty, it can mean obligation, it can mean law. Just as I mentioned, Sanatan Dharma, eternal law. It can also mean justice. It can also mean teaching. For example, what is called Buddhism in English is Bauddha Dharma, teaching of the Buddha. So you see, it is a very large thing, but always to do with what is the right action. What is the right. So Arjuna has a crisis about what is his right action under the circumstances. Then Krishna's overall response is not explicitly so stated in the Bhagavad Gita, this is my understanding. Overall response is that no action can be right until the actor is right. Then for Arjuna to become the right actor, he needs to undertake the practice of yoga. Yoga literally means union. Its root is union. So connecting with the real, with the ultimate. That's the overall purpose of yoga. Which is why I sometimes remind people that sometimes, even in the Theosophical Society actually, the word religion gets translated as dharma, which is really in fact not the correct translation. The closest translation of religion will be yoga, because religion comes from the Latin religio, reunite, more or less the same thing as yoga does. But people just get carried away with some words and then they repeatedly get repeated again and again. For example, the classical expression in the Theosophical is nasti satyo paro dharma. There is no truth greater than, no responsibility or action greater than truth. My father used to say, nasti satya. So then Krishna basically teaches that if he becomes the right actor, for which he needs to undertake the practice of yoga, which I mentioned yesterday slightly in passing. The main yoga that Krishna teaches is Buddhi Yoga. I don't want to go into the details of that. But the idea is that then he can become aware of not only what is his possibility, what are his actions, but can he hear what literally Krishna does not even use the word spirit, he uses the word the embodied one. The Sanskrit word is dehin, that which is in the body. The embodied particle of divinity. So with practice of yoga he is able to connect with Buddhi. Buddhi is higher mind, with which he can then hear or be aware of what this particle of divinity wants him to do. And then he says there are many levels of dharma. So it is true that at the level of the family dharma, you should not undertake this particular battle, but there are other levels of dharma. For example, we occasionally have this kind of example. A CEO of a company may well discover that what his company is producing is harmful for the planet Earth. And he could also feel some responsibility for the earth, but he also feels responsibility for increasing the share price for his shareholders. Now what do? Here is a crisis of dharma. What is the right action? In fact, I suggest to you that you look at your own life, whenever you have felt any kind of crisis, it is always to do with the crisis of dharma. What is the right responsibility or what is the right action to undertake? And certainly Krishna would say, if you really seriously practice yoga, then only you can become the right actor and become aware of what is called from above. I use the word above because that's the usual Abrahamic notion. Somehow God is above. But really it's the subtler level of reality. So that's the general background I wanted to give you here. So now, therefore, Krishna then teaches various kinds of yogas and has many things to teach in the process of why Arjuna needs to In fact, he even ends up saying, some of you may have recently seen this film, Oppenheimer, where he actually even quotes this from. Amazingly, he even knew Sanskrit. Actually, he quote when he saw the first atomic bomb being exploded, he said something from the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. And that I have come to destroy this particular age, to begin a new era. That is what Krishna actually says. So here we come to the, especially to do with reincarnation. But that's the overall background. If anybody wants more details of any of these, please ask me, but it's a very large thing to go into. As the incarnated being, as I said, he doesn't even refer to as the spirit or soul or anything like this, but as the incarnated being, Dehi. Sometimes, this is another thing, the same word, depending on whether it is being used as a nominal or as an objective, it has a different version in Sanskrit. So it makes it very complicated. So, Dehi in this body passes through childhood, youth and old age, so it passes on to another body. For them, from the perspective of Krishna, death is just changing clothes. In fact, even specifically says that what is real cannot cease to be, and the unreal cannot come into being. The truth about both is seen by the seers. Know that which pervades all this is indestructible. No one can destroy the imperishable. Bodies of the incarnated eternal can be destroyed, but the eternal itself is indestructible and immeasurable. Therefore fight, O Bharata. See, absolutely out of context, but that is the overall suggestion. This is why I said if it was a group of writers having a crisis, he would say therefore write. He won't say therefore fight. But again and again, you will often find this kind of remark coming totally out of context here, for example. Just as a person discards worn out clothes and puts on new ones, so the dweller in the body discards worn out bodies and takes on new ones. Weapons do not cut it, fire cannot burn it, water does not make it wet, nor does the wind dry it. It cannot be cut, it cannot be burned, it cannot be made wet or dry. It is eternal, all pervading, permanent, immovable and primordial. It is unmanifest, unthinkable and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve. Very strong suggestion that the real person is not the body, Those are just like the clothes being worn. The real person is this element of the eternal spirit, and that does not die. Again and again this emphasis. I think since some of you are here for the first time, let me repeat this remark, which I have quoted already more than once. Every religion says that the death of the body is not the death of the person. Whatever they mean by this, but this is absolutely common assertion. Always the suggestion that your real self is not your body. It's easier to say this, but do I recognize this? Do I see what is my real self? That is actually the call from the spiritual perspective. It's all very easy to quote these things and even begin to say, I believe this, but what the hell does that mean? It changes nothing in one's life unless one actually sees, how do I relate with something that does not die when this body dies? Another remark maybe I will say that in a moment here. Yama is one of the devas in the Indian tradition. When we say deva is very difficult to translate, but it's like an angel, if you like. But the suggestion, nevertheless, is that there are different levels of the devas, and always throughout the Indian tradition, the suggestion is that all of these are also within us. They're not just over there. Different levels within myself, including the very highest God, Brahma. And in fact, the call is to relate with that. That is called the supreme identity, to discover that my real, truest self is identically the same as Brahma. That is called the supreme identity in the Upanishads. So, Yama is the lord of both death and dharma, meaning here I'm saying cosmic law and order. As I said, the word dharma is impossible to translate by one single English word, but cosmic law is another possibility of it. So, therefore, death from this perspective is not something to get rid of, it's just part of life. Life with a capital L. One is born, one dies, just like changing one's clothes. That's nothing to sort of so worry about it or get so upset about it. The real does not die. And then Krishna says, I am eternal life and also death. I am the being and the non-being, O Arjuna. I am all destroying death and I am the origin of all that is to be. So he's running the whole show. In fact, this is one of the very important, in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Maybe I even say this in Sanskrit to you because it's a very important shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavam mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. At the end of many births, wise people come to me realizing that all there is Krishna. Such a person is a great soul, but very rare. So all there is Krishna. Even a stone is Krishna. And then Krishna actually says more than once in the Bhagavad Gita, I am in the body of everybody, in the mind of everybody, in the heart of everybody. It's really much saying the same as gets said repeatedly here. God is omnipresent. Sounds nice, but is he right here? Right around me? Behind me? So I keep reminding you again and again that these words have just become cliches and we don't really relate any reality with them and don't see what is the implication of this in our own life. Another thing, again, I mentioned this yesterday also, eternal is something different from everlasting. In fact, there are several mythological stories in India. In one of them, a deva, let's say an angel, is blessing a human being for having done something good. So he says, whatever you ask, I'll give it to you. But if you stop asking, then I'll kill you. So then, of course, naturally, he asks for a nice palace, asks for all kinds of money and wealth and everything else, and he gets it. Then he doesn't know what else to ask. So now this Deva said, well, this is your end. End of your desire is your end. So then suddenly this character has a good idea. He says, please bring a large pole, and you go on the top of that pole, and once you get there, then you come down the pole, and once you're down, then you keep going up the pole, keep doing this, everlastingly. You see, everlasting simply means a continuation of the same thing in time. Eternal is freedom from time, but it is not against time. I have a whole article about this, is everlasting eternal, in my book, The Spiritual Roots of Yoga. Actually, it's also available on my website. You don't have to pay for it. You can read it there. These are two completely, so the call in any spiritual teaching is toward eternal wisdom, not something that is everlasting. In fact, wisdom often is not very lasting in any case. Soon gets lost in every teaching, in every tradition. And then this something I quoted earlier also last time, an eternal portion of myself becomes the jiva in the world of jivas, creatures, and works upon the five senses as well as the sixth one, the manas, mind, which are in Prakriti. I think I won't repeat this now here again. This is the reason that manas, which is the lower mind, is usually just included among the senses by Krishna, that it more or less serves whatever the body wishes or desires or what it fears. But to relate with the subtler or the higher mind called buddhi. When the Lord takes up a body and when he abandons it, he goes forth taking these with him as the wind takes the perfumes from their source, presiding over the ear, the eye, the touch, the taste, and the smell, and also the mind. He enjoys the sense objects. Just, some of you probably have read it. You might be amused by it. In one of the Upanishads, I think it's in the Chandogya Upanishad, but I'm not sure of this right now. Different senses in the body are arguing with each other. The ears say, well, if you stop hearing, it'll be very dull life. The eyes say, well, if you can't see any beauty, what's the point of it? And then the taste says, if you can't taste something, it's all completely dumb. So each one of them is competing with each other. So prana, the breath, says, okay, I'm just going away for a few minutes. You decide whatever you wish to decide. So prana is usually translated as breath. But let me remind you again, in Sanskrit as well as in all the other ancient languages, at least that I have checked, Chinese, Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, the word for breath and for spirit is either exactly the same or very close to each other. Pneuma is the Greek word for breath or for spirit. Right? So, because spirit enters into me, into each one of us, as our breath. And that is what keeps us alive. And when that leaves, so-called Ravi will die. So it needs to become very clear about paying attention to one's breath and not manipulating it one way or the other. The deluded do not perceive him in his going forth, or in his staying, or in his enjoying through the gunas. Guna, again, is rather difficult to translate, but in general the notion is that all the forces in Prakriti, in nature, are being driven by three different kind of qualities of action, quality of energy, and that's called guna. So there are three different gunas. I'll come back to this in a few minutes, but let me just read this here. Those who have the eye of sacred knowledge, I gave the Sanskrit word, whenever it becomes difficult to really, that one simple translation is not sufficient, then I end up giving the Sanskrit origin for this. The yogis who strive see him dwelling in themselves, but the ignorant whose self is unperfected do not see him even if they strive to do so. Here is a remark of my teacher Jean de Salzman, which tries to convey this in a slightly different language, slightly more modernistic language. There is an energy which is trying to evolve, that is why it comes into a body. If a person works and helps the evolution of this energy, at death this energy goes to a higher level. If one does not work, the energy returns to its own level. But the human life is wasted. I mentioned this yesterday also. Many remarks, if I end up quoting from Jean de Salzman, they are all in my book, Heart Without Measure, which is available at the bookstore here. Just continuing with some of her remarks. She says, what do you serve? There is something in you, a higher energy. Of course, she was saying this to me, but she's also saying it to you. What do you serve? There is something in you, a higher energy, which is worthy of respect. Without this, you serve only your pleasures. This is not to say that you should not look after the needs of the body or of the mind. Unless you respect and serve the finer energy in you, which is not you, work here has no sense. The body must obey something higher. Otherwise, it has no purpose. It cannot serve only itself. The body itself is designed for destruction, but it can serve something else. The body is not the most important thing. The important thing is the real I, which is independent of the physical body. But the body is very necessary because the higher energy needs the body in order to manifest itself. The body is needed so that the I can have an action. The I is not personal. I can awaken me and serve the earth. The earth as a whole has need of more conscious energy. Very strong emphasis in her teaching. Your body is not only yours. The first time when I heard this, I was completely surprised. Who else is my body just for somebody else? Gradually I have become aware that not only my body, but any of energy I have, even any money I have or any talent, all this is, unless it is actually serving something subtler, higher, which is not me, it has no purpose, no meaning. So this remark of hers, please consider this seriously. I was very shocked by it the first time I heard it. Your body is not only yours. You need to work in order to relate the higher with the lower. That is the purpose of human existence. The earth needs conscious work. It is in need of higher energy. If I do not let the higher energy descend to the earth through this body, how else will it come down? It cannot be done easily or cheaply, but it must be done. It is necessary for the maintenance of our world. Now I come to the oldest text in any Indo-European language, the Rig Veda, but this particular remark is actually repeated later in the two Upanishads as well. Two birds of beautiful wing, friends and always united, cling to a common tree. One eats the sweet fruit, the other looks on without eating. One is an eternal witness, and the other one is participating in the actions. And to use a little bit of the language coming from the biblical tradition, one is much closer to, or could be called, the spirit, which is transpersonal. The other is soul, which is personal, and it is in the body, and it has its own level. It is engaged with the body, and the body can assist its evolution, or it can get wholly occupied. I quoted Plotinus, the great Greek philosopher, saying, our soul is amphibious in nature. It can sink completely into matter, or it can soar into the one. So soul has this possibility because it's participating. So you can look at these two birds in that context if you like. But not to get, each tradition has its uniqueness. It can be assisted if we look at it with some respect without trying to prove it right or wrong, or saying, oh well, this is just like this. Sure, if saying this is like this assists you to understand it a bit more, fine. But not in order to put it down in some way or the other. So even my suggestion that these two birds may be like the spirit and soul is a possibility of trying to understand something about it, but not to get stuck with it. So the three gunas that I had, the word guna was used earlier, so I'm just bringing this again here. These are the three sort of qualities of nature. Sattva, the guna of lucidity and mindfulness. Rajas, the guna of passion and activity. Tamas, the guna corresponding to inertia and sloth. But here I have to remind you, everything, especially in the Indian context, always has some contradictory aspect to this. Tamas, which is clearly one would think is just laziness. Shiva, who is the lord of yoga, lord of music, lord of theater, his guna is tamas. Why? Because tamas is also stability. I'm not going to easily just buy something. This is what really makes a searcher. Great things are said by the Buddha or by Christ or by Krishna. If I just say, oh yeah, I believe, that is never going to help anybody. If I question it, challenge it, and to see how it applies to me, is it really true what Christ said? Is it really true what the Buddha said? Then I can in fact relate with this one. So that call, that stability, not easily agreeing, easily giving up, is a very fundamental requirement. And that's the guna attached with Shiva. That's why I'm reminding you, don't take any of these words so literal-mindedly.
Ravi?
Yeah.
In saying stability, would that mean balance?
Balance also.
That there's a time to act and a time to rest?
Exactly, yeah. Balance also. Then Krishna says, if sattva prevails at the time of the death of the body, then one attains the stainless world of great sages. If rajas prevails at the time, one is born among those attached to action. If dissolved while in tamas, one is born in the womb of the ignorant. But then he says, when the dweller in the body rises above the three gunas from which all bodies have been produced, one is freed from birth and death, from old age and suffering, and enjoys eternal life. Again, the word eternal here is not everlasting life. One needs to keep this again and again in mind. And then he says, whoever leaves the body and departs remembering me, at the end undoubtedly comes to my state of being. That is really the call in the Indian tradition. In fact, in all serious teachings, you think Christ is not calling us to become son. In fact, he explicitly says in the Gospel of John, first chapter, you can read the verses about 10th to 15th. He's calling all of us to be his brothers and sisters, children of the same Father who is his Father. So, but in any churchly way, this will be considered completely crazy. Even he was crucified because he says, the Father and I are one. But this is really, in any case, very strongly the call in the Indian tradition to become one with the highest level. Krishna in this case is Madbhav, my being. O son of Kunti, this another, Kunti is the name of the mother of Arjuna. So the yogis attain that form which they are tending towards in life and remembering which they leave the body. Therefore, at all times remember me and fight. And as you can imagine, many people in India end up naming their son Krishna, so that when they're about to die, they can remember Krishna. So you see how we want to use all of these things. Those who die with all the doors of the senses closed, their mind connected with the heart, their prana leaving through the top of the skull, remembering Krishna, attain the state of oneness with him. Being one with Krishna is not possible without being free of my usual self. So I quote to you here a Shatpat Brahmana, a very great ancient text. Only those may enter the sun door who can truly respond to the question, who are you? With nobody. This is why I repeatedly call people to try to understand we need to be on the way, but out of the way. All this is easier said than done. Because every action that we undertake, we want some reward for it, some achievement for it. In fact, a great Christian sage, Meister Eckhart, actually even makes this remark. Ultimately, even forget about doing the will of God. Because even that comes from one's own, oh, if I do the will of God, maybe I'll get to heaven. Here, as I had said, maybe I should have made this remark very early on, death and life are both parts of life. Therefore, to remain alive in the bodily form would be considered very strange from the Indian perspective. Whereas in the biblical tradition, many prophets, for example, Christ himself, Prophet Muhammad, Mother Mary, they went to heaven in the body, bodily went to heaven. At least that is what the tradition says. So I'm trying to point out very fundamental contrast or difference between these here. Okay, so Shatpat Brahman is a very ancient text before the Upanishads actually. I don't have time to go into again and again describing all of these things. Then the oldest Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, I've given the reference here, describes two different ways. One is the way of the Devas. Devas simply means enlightened ones or gods or angels. And the other of human beings, ordinary human beings. In the former, after death, a person feeds the sun. In the other one, feeds the moon. And those who do not take either of these ways become after death insects, moths, or whatever here that bites. So you decide. Here is another Upanishad. When people depart from this world, it is to the moon that they all go. By means of their life breaths, the moon swells up in the fortnight of waxing, and through the fortnight of waning, it propels them to new birth. Now the moon is the door to the heavenly world. It allows those who answer its question to pass. As to those who do not answer its question, after they have become rain, it rains them down here on earth, where they are born again in these various conditions, as a worm, an insect, a fish, a bird, a lion, a boar, a rhinoceros, a tiger, a man, or some other creature, each in accordance with his actions and his knowledge. Who are you? He is asked again. I am you, he replies. Then he sets him free. See, the call really is to be one with the highest. If one is actually able to say that, then one is free. Otherwise, there is a continual reincarnation in one form or the other, and that the moon is what swallows you at waxing time and puts you out as rain at the waning time. Many people so-called addicted to Gurdjieff teaching think this was Gurdjieff's original idea. This is the oldest Upanishads talking about this. And in fact, there is absolutely nothing in the Gurdjieff teaching which cannot be found in the traditional teachings. He himself actually says that. I'm not bringing anything new. I'm just really bringing something that has been lost in the traditions. I suggest this to you as possibly that can help a little bit to understand something. Which guna, sattva, rajas or tamas, would you say is the prominent one in your life? What do you expect or imagine your next incarnation to be? And as I have also repeatedly said, if anybody wishes to ask a question, write to me. This is my email address there. This is the Indian version of my book, the Bhagavad Gita. Especially those who are in India, it's much cheaper to buy this in India, the Indian version. It's much more expensive here. No, I tell this in the TS in India. Don't buy the Western version. It's twice as expensive as the Indian version. Well, first of all, before I stop the slide, is there any particular slide anybody wishes me to go back to and you want to look at it?
I do have a question about reincarnation. It's going to sound very naive. So in the middle states, we are always incarnate beings. Only in the beginning and the end are we unmanifest. So if we go from one life to another, from the one body to another body, is our spirit confined in that body?
Is
Our spirit.
confined?
So, for say my mother, who died, right? My mother then presumably is in another body. But sometimes I feel my mother.
Yes.
So, how do I make sense of that? If her spirit then has taken on another body?
Especially before the general, I'm just mentioning the general idea. For me to imagine that I really know it will be quite crazy. But the overall general perspective is that until she is born again or incarnated again, she is in a subtle body. There are other phrases that get used for it, like suksham sharir, etc., but many other words. So that subtle body is not confined to a particular place, etc. For example, first of all, let me give you a different example. An angel can be at two places at once. Human beings can't be. An angel can go through this wall. Human beings can't do that. So one needs to realize that various laws apply to different levels of qualities of being. So subtle body is not confined by the same laws to be stuck at one place, etc., as gross body is confined. In fact, there is a fair amount of data is now being gathered. One particular incident I mentioned to you, this is a friend of mine, Peter Fenwick in England, who has done a lot of research on this. On one occasion, first of all, there was a couple who was separated from each other. The man was in Australia, the woman is in England, and about 5 a.m., the woman suddenly wakes up, has a strange sound, as if her husband, whom she is separated from, but that he's passed away. Later on, she gets this message that that was exactly the time in Australia that he actually passed away. And exactly at that time, the big clock in her living room stopped. Now, what are we speaking about? Some forces are at play. One of the things I keep reminding people again and again, this is actually a remark of Saint Benedictine. What we know about nature is not all there is to nature. We know many things about nature, but there is all kinds of laws are there, all kinds of forces are there. Whatever we mean by occult powers, especially in the theosophical literature, there is endless reference to all this. What does it mean? Occult power basically means these are slightly other than ordinary powers. They are not following the ordinary laws. So, from that point of view, one could say, not that I could possibly say that from my own personal experience, but your mother in the subtle body can be at more than one place at once, or she could be here, right next to you. Why not? Just to be stuck with our ordinary physical laws that we know. In fact, yesterday I made this remark generally. The call in all the spiritual teachings actually is to become freer and freer of the laws that are binding you. For example, in my case, I gave this example yesterday also, very simple reaction. Somebody is nice to me in the morning, I'm happy to be with them at lunchtime. If they are mean to me, I don't want to be next to them. Now that's a law, psychological law of reaction. But a slightly wiser person, I wish I could be one, be a little free of this. So then they are free of that law. And actually the call is increasingly to be free of various laws. An angel, as I just finished saying earlier, is not stuck in one room. He's free of that kind of law. He can go across through a wall. And I can assure you, in my own experience, both with Krishnamurti, whom I met many, many times, and Jean the Salesman, they could actually know before I said what the hell I'm about to say. In fact, on one occasion I was so struck by, I said to Krishnamurti, "Sir, why don't you tell me what is deep down my need or wish? That will save me some work." Because I'm sure that you know that more than I do. He said, "That will be like reading your private mail." So I'm not going to tell you. So I think we don't realize that we are obviously, each one of us is at an ordinary level, stuck with ordinary laws. The call is to be free of the laws. God is not stuck here or there. Whatever we mean by omnipresent, He's free of being stuck at any one particular place or any other law that you can think of. Just to quote to you from St. Paul, one of my favorite theologians, "Whosoever is connected with the Spirit is above the law." Now, the trouble is, one can misuse it to say, I am connected with the Spirit, so none of this law applies to me. You see what I'm saying? This is how always the misunderstanding of these things comes, and we get tyrannical rulers and everything else. They're above the law. Do you think Trump has any laws? No, I don't want to get into this, but seriously think about this. These ideas are to be applied first of all to oneself, to see what is binding me, what is keeping me in bondage, how can I actually be free of this? Ultimately, the whole call in every spiritual teaching is complete freedom. That is the very meaning of the word moksha. Moksha simply means freedom or mukti. So, freedom is easier to say, but we are all very much bound, even by our cultural background, the whole rigmarole just goes on. So, to become aware of this, because another thing I maybe have not mentioned this so far, awareness is the mechanism of transformation. In fact, I don't personally know any other mechanism. Of course, traditionally in religious literature you hear, for example, we hear Vivekananda was touched by Ramakrishna and something transformed him. It is possible, but I have personally never encountered anything like this. For me, if I deeply see, honestly, accurately that I am greedy, gradually I become free of greediness. Awareness is the mechanism of transformation. In fact, there is no other mechanism that I know of, which is why the strong call to impartially look at yourself, because the call is to be transformed. How am I going to be transformed? Unless I impartially see the devil in me, and that also will be gradually transformed if I see its right place. Not to be against the devil. Devil is the most helpful angel of all angels. Actually, people don't realize this. He was the highest of all angels, Lucifer. Okay, so maybe have a 15 minutes break and then you can try to reform me later on. Sorry, I can't connect. Well, let me just go through all of them. If anybody wants to just ask to stop, please. This one?
Yes.
What's happening?
She has to make it so that people can see the other screen. That has to be done on the laptop.
Okay, anybody else wishes to?
Ravi, I had a question about this this idea that the prominence of the guna at the moment of death. What about I mean, people who are dying now in wartime, and we have this whole situation with Israel and Gaza, and I'm thinking about the forces impinging on these individuals who are leaving their bodies in a time of just terrible turmoil. So how would this work? Because we have inclinations within ourselves. I may be reasonably peaceful within myself, but around me is this terrible extreme of rajas, for example, and then the extreme of tamas, which is which may be depression and inertia and just a terrible fear. It doesn't seem so simple as the slide might suggest, the earlier slide about what was prominent in my dad. What do you think?
No, I agree it's not so simple, but there are two remarks. One is, if you look at really the history of the planet, this kind of situation has always been there. Neighboring kings attacking each other and wanting to rape the women on the other side, destroy their crops, etc. This has been, what has changed is, first of all, much larger numbers now. Now we have 8 billion people on the planet. Hardly 100 years ago, this was less than half the population of the planet, which is now. And certainly when we think about 1,000 years ago, the population was not even 10% of what the population is now. So, and secondly, the weapons have become much more strenuous, much harder, they can kill more people, etc. So therefore things become more visible to us. But really my sad impression is that throughout human history this has been the case. People killing each other, conquering each other, destroying each other, wanting to be more and more important, more and more self-occupied. But then in the midst of it all, and today also, there are some people, even the fact that it concerns you, that you wish to be not wholly occupied with sending more weapons or this or that, throughout human history there have been some people who wish to be free of this kind of incarnage. Now, then the question really is, my own personal impression is that one actually has to seriously face what it is possible for me to do under the circumstance. Otherwise, one can just waste a lot of energy, just getting unhappy, uneasy, becoming tense. Who does it help? So, therefore, to accept the situation is really itself a fundamental requirement, that this is just the way the planet Earth is and has almost always been. But whatever part I can play, for example, in my own case, the little part I can play is to assist with whatever little contribution I can make to the Red Cross or to the doctors across borders. In my personal understanding, these two organizations are absolutely remarkable organizations, trying to do things across the borders, and even some of them get into great danger. Many of these doctors actually get killed, all this going across borders, etc. So, if something I can contribute there, that's a part I can play. And then really, on the other hand, to just accept that this is just the law of the universe. That's my impression. But I mean, if you feel that there is something active you can actually do, by all means, please do it. Otherwise, one is just wasting a lot of energy. One gains absolutely nothing. In some cases, it may also be, for example, particularly in, this is coming from outside USA. I look at the US government here is absolutely, in spite of the fact that Biden is now recognizing terrible things going on in Gaza, he's still wholeheartedly sending more armies, etc., to Israel. Now, partly because, I mean, I may be wrong, my own impression is that much of the economy here in the USA is actually controlled by Jewish people. And every person, politician, is very eager to have connection with them to get, otherwise, even some of the universities, if some of the students there object against this, the organization or the Jewish people decide not to fund the university anymore. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable what is going on. US policy seems to me to be determined wholly by some kind of religious addiction. And even though Biden keeps saying that they should stop fighting, etc., but still sending more weapons to Israel, etc. And if somebody in the United Nations wants to pass a resolution condemning it, or even saying, USA is the only country actually vetoing it.
Absolutely.
If I were an American, I'll be absolutely ashamed of myself in this case.
Absolutely.
But now,
But then what can you do?
Yeah.
You know, have this reaction and get depressed, you know, when you can't do anything, going back to your argument.
yeah, yes,
I may be mistaken. I thought Maria was asking, but maybe I just associated it, the question of if someone dies in battle, if the last thing they think about is going to determine the last life, that might be a different focus than, you know, when they're meditating in the room in peacetime or something. So how does that, I know psychically that sudden death, the body doesn't come, the spirit doesn't come back right away. Those people wander an in-between place for a while. So I don't know if you can comment.
I don't really
I don't
have
know if
anything
that's
to-
what you were at, is that what you were asking?
Yes,
I
yes,
know.
it seems to me that,
Yeah.
that what is around me and within me at the moment of my leaving, if that's so, if that's going to propel me not only into the inner worlds for a time of rest, but may also influence my return. And we have, it has been suggested that individuals who die in war come back soon.
Yeah.
Sooner than they might otherwise if the life is cut short. And we have this situation now where there may be many returning very soon because of the trauma. And what will we have then on our hands to support, you know, these individuals? So that was my concern about the time of death. And we've always, even now there's rituals that are done at death that are intended to make it easier to move into the other worlds. They have none of that. There's turmoil.
Yeah. No, that is true. But really not only people dying in the battle, none of those religious rituals are actually performed even for those people who die in hospitals. It's really quite interesting to see what happens suddenly when the body is declared dead by the doctor. It's almost like a sack of potatoes. They're sort of put on a trolley with many other dead bodies. They're just like, and then to find somebody who's going to cremate them or bury them. No, these classical religious performances that were undertaken in every tradition, not only in the Christian tradition or Hindu or Islam, every tradition has taken that to assist the movement of the soul. That is very uncommon, not so easy, especially if a person dies in the hospital. Again, because the general underlying attitude in the whole of the allopathic medicine, as far as I can see, is that there is all this business about spirit is just bullshit talk. It's just that the body is the only thing the person is. So when the body is dead, that's the end. So this notion that the death of the body is not the death of the person, it sounds all cute from their point of view, but it has no truth to this. Body is the only thing. So with that attitude, there we are. It's not only in the battleground, it's really, look in any hospital. And any of my friends that at least I have known or heard about, they don't want to die in hospital. It's not easy on the other hand.
May I give a
Yeah.
quick example?
Yeah, please.
When I was living in New York, I went to a party on Central Park West, and there was a loud car crash. We were on an upper, high-up floor. I didn't look out the window, but we knew, and of course a car crash in Manhattan is not that unusual. So I didn't think more about it. Later, when I went home, I was in bed and had just turned the light out, and a figure was standing at the foot of my bed, a subtle being, and he was missing his left arm. So the next morning, I called my friend who hosted the party, and I said, "Do you know anything about that car crash?" He said, "Yes, it was a fatal accident, a man died." I said, "Were there any other details?" He said, "Yes, his arm was severed." I said, "Which arm?" He said, "Left." Now, that's an example of I've had other experiences like that, but when sudden death occurred, sometimes they're confused. They'll seek empaths, and they don't know where they are, kind of thing.
Yep.
So there is something after death. That's all
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Also, in fact, you were implying that in your remarks also, a person who has been, if you like, suddenly dead, meaning shot dead or had a car accident, they seem to be born again very quickly.
I'm not sure about that.
They're having some of the scientific data about this, gathering this more and more. I may even mention this in the next talk. As if they were obviously already very much connected with the world and have been just accidentally thrown away, and so they return very quickly. Yeah, what are you going to say?
I was just going to add to that. I work with this woman in Colorado who has this gift of being in other dimensions. And she went to this place where they do this ritual of recreating the Civil War. And she said there are so many souls that were just hanging out in the trees because they were confused, because they kept playing the Civil War battles and they weren't sure where they were, so she helped them cross over.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the actual reenactment of these battles kept them almost here, I guess. You know,
Yes.
kind of a strange one, but anyway.
No, I think, at least for me anyway, there are really all kinds of mysteries connected with what happens after death. On the other hand, traditionally, and Annie Besant's book is a very good example of that actually, that there are different stages through which a person still goes. I use the word person. I mean, the body is obviously dead, and I'm assuming that the person which was in the body then goes through various stages, and then depending on what is the corresponding laws for this person, depending on the kind of action they undertook or kind of feelings they had, they'll be reborn again. But she goes through different stages of this. And then the very strong suggestion by her, actually more strongly than by anybody else that I have come across, that it is not a good idea to try to ask your relative who is dead to come be near you or to allow their journey to continue. Otherwise you're actually interfering with it by calling them, etc. And she very strongly emphasizes that. Yeah.
So this whole notion of complete freedom that you talked about, that's the ultimate, and maneuvering this earthly plane, like with the Gaza situation or with Trump or with all of these different forces that are the injustice in Ukraine, or all of the distortions that live inside some of these politicians who speak, and the distortions are just phenomenal. It's almost like blows my mind how many distortions that people are creating and then acting out of. And it's to see all this and still have charge around some of these things, and yet the bigger purpose, the bigger freedom, is this larger space of love that can hold all of this and not get pulled out into duality, so that one can fully be in this larger space that can hold it all. And I'm not there yet. I keep working at it. I keep noticing it, and I keep working with it. And this Gabi Mate, this one guy supposedly who is Israeli, and he brought together all of these people, and he's a psychologist. He had a woman in the room, supposedly, I haven't seen it, but was holding the space when he got had charge, so that he could still hold this larger territory of love. So I guess my question is, how do we, that maneuvering through these duality moments that are so full of injustice and distortion and maybe call it evil, just feeling helpless with that, and even helplessness is a doorway into something larger. So I guess, and then with the idea of complete freedom, because to be completely free, we can't be caught in any of this. And yet we're human beings and we're being pulled by all of these.
No, I first of all completely agree with what you're saying and see the importance of the remarks that you're making. I occasionally ask myself, and it is related with what you're saying, if Christ were now here, or the Buddha were here, and they look at all this situation, how would they act? In a way, this is really what you're asking. How can one come from that level of all love? If these people were connected with that level, one wonders how would they act when they see this kind of carnage going on? Will they find ways of stopping it in some way? Or will they simply just accept that that's the way, this is like the universal laws? And to some extent, I sometimes remind people again and again, 8 billion people, more than 100 million will die between today and a year from today. And as many, in fact, more may be born. So maybe life and death, love and torture at the usual level is all just part of ongoing processes in the world. And so maybe these people, when we say they are really free, they just see this as just an ongoing process and accept this. Just as we might see, as the water is frozen, it becomes solid ice. If it is heated, it begins to be like steam. So one just sees it, that this is just the universal law. Doesn't need to get attached to the ice or to the steam.
I love it when you say the freedom we seek is freedom from ourselves. If that's so, we don't want freedom from Trump, Gaza, all these terrible things. We want freedom from that part of myself that becomes attached to that. Would that not be so?
Or even is reacting to that also, no?
Or witnesses it, but not as an identification.
Or creating it.
So what would be your impression? How would Christ behave in a case like this?
I would hope he would stay centered, because he could be of more help to others if he's centered rather than attached to the evil or whatever.
No, but also we need to realize that I often ask myself, Christ was probably heard by 100,000 people in Jerusalem. How many actually followed him? 12.5.
12, yeah.
Yeah. And so that has always been the case in a certain way, even though occasionally we have had very great sages. But the number of people who actually try to follow them in the sense of, one could say, I am a follower of Christ. Well, that's just double talk. But really, how many people in fact practice something that he brought? And in that sense to connect with his quality of being? Extremely few. Yeah.
I just want to add this, and everybody knows this, I'm sure, but in thinking about the remarks that she just made, I think...
Can you speak up?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about the crucifixion of Christ and about Christ's position on violence and all that, and what he said about his own crucifixion. They know not what they do.
Yeah.
forgive them. So I would imagine that he would look at a battle and have some, reaction in the same way, that he would experience love in spite of what he's seen. I don't know how you do that.
That's the question, is that alchemy that has to happen to rise to another level of love that creates a larger container upon which everything can dissolve inside of when you are at that state of being, and then you walk through the world holding that container of love, and everything dissolves inside of it because it's less than that. And that, to me, is the challenge of what it means to be human. Not to ignore what humanity brings us in injustice and unfairness and distortion, but to somehow alchemize that into something larger through the awareness. With it. And I don't really know how it's going to happen. But I know that that is the only way out. Because there's nothing more than love. And anytime we engage in the duality, we get all the forces that are opposed to us come at us. And it just weakens us. And it doesn't serve at this larger level of complete freedom either. You wanted to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to add a comment, really, that I think we have to also look at the lives of the prophets and the saints and sages. There was also, with some of them, a fiery compassion that pushed them to rise up against injustice, what was incorrect. I mean, Jesus also flipped the tables of the money changers in front of the temple. And Jesus also, took very strong stances against injustice and mistreatment of others. And so it's very difficult to exist. I was having a conversation at the break about being a sensitive person in a world that seems filled with injustice, sort of the end of the Kali Yuga. But we all must do our part. And so if you ask someone what Jesus or Buddha might have done, I mean, each person will have a different answer. But I certainly think we should do what's in our power, whether that's, encouraging people to vote, or giving money to the Red Cross, or Doctors Without Borders, or it doesn't mean just to exist and not act. I think all of us have this fundamental crisis of action, like Arjuna. What can I do? What should I do? What's the correct thing to do? What feels like right action in this moment? But we should not ignore that fiery compassion, doing what is right. And having worked with refugees across the world and children in war-torn environments, there's a tremendous sense of telling one story and rising to a place of forgiveness and moving through the world in the present moment. But I remember being in Dharamsala and working with Tibetan refugees, and they often talked about still having a fire of compassion, or having audience with the Dalai Lama and someone was crying about the situation that they, either a Sudanese refugee or a Cambodian refugee, crying about the situation that they endured, and the Dalai Lama just laughing, but laughing in a compassionate, loving way, like, I know my child. But what now? What shall we do now? And so I just wanted to add that comment about each of us having our own crisis of conscience.
Yes, Brad, do you wish to say something? Yeah, I see many people. Yeah.
Can we, there's
Yeah,
Lisa.
Yeah,
She's had her hand up the whole time, so.
Yeah.
Well, it's just an encompassing thing of everything that's happening here. It's like, I feel like your slide about the two birds is what it comes back down to, right? We've got both. We've got the action in the world, and we've got the observer, and hearing or feeling the fire and passion in what David was saying. It's like he's in that battle right now. Like that's what we're here for, and it feels really juicy and perfect, really, that we're engaging in both. That both are there, and the one of the Yoga Sutras. I don't know it in Sanskrit. I don't know where it is, but it was essentially about. Suffering occurs, but unnecessary suffering can and should be avoided. And that's sort of like that space that I like to try to be in when you're in that place of feeling like what you had said at the beginning about what can I do now? What is the right action, as you were saying, but also knowing that there's some force that's greater than us that knows way more than I could ever possibly know. And I don't know what's right and wrong, really, really, really. I just know what's right in this moment if I'm in that place of love.
Yes.
It's not to act and do a right action, Doctors Without Borders or whatever. That's one of my favorites. One of my favorite lines from the Bhagavad Gita, I can't cite chapter and verse, and I may be paraphrasing, but it's do your ordained dharma and then let go of the fruits of the action. So we act, but then we let it go. And that to me, I love that. You can probably state it as it should be stated. But that stays with me. Do you know the correct wording of that verse?
Actually, karma phala tyag, to engage in action, but not to be stuck with whether it will succeed or not succeed. Because there are many factors which are at play, including what is called daivam, the wish of the devas, whether it should succeed this way or that way. So many.
That's not our job.
Yeah.
We just do the right.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I've just been thinking about, Gurdjieff mentioned that if there were just 200 fully conscious people, that it would change the world. And I suspect that today it would take a lot more than that. But and maybe very few of us could reach that. But it seems to me that one of the most valuable things that any individual can do is to work on oneself to make to elevate oneself and one's being a little bit, and just as it's important to, it's kind of like voting is a value, but your spiritual vote is a little bit of that piece of that puzzle, and particularly in terms of violence, it seems to me that violence can be very subtle, that even a negative thought can come as a negative word, which can create a conflict, which can evolve into a war. And if we do the inner work to see what's happening inside ourselves, that's one little grain of sand towards a better world.
Thank you. That's obviously a helpful remark in any case, that still to try to maintain a certain inner calm, to understand whatever one can do, to try to do it, rather than getting so occupied with getting so upset that one's energy is just being lost without being helpful to anything. And somebody else wish to? Yes.
Yes, I had a question relating to something you said yesterday, which relates also to today. I think what I heard you say was that the real I, the true I, is independent of the physical body. And that immediately quieted my mind down because it stopped my usual way of thinking. What did you mean by that? Because we have if that's true, then the true I is not even in touch with the nature all around me that I love. What could that mean?
No, from what I understand, that true I needs this body and the mind to be even in touch with nature, etc. But that doesn't mean that it is of the same substance as the body or the mind. It is, if you like, a subtler substance, but whatever we mean by the word soul. So when we speak about the true I, the reference is really to the soul, or capital S, self. The word I gets used sometimes, especially by Jeanne de Salzman. She tends to use the word I and me, if you like, capital S self and the small s self. And the suggestion that the I, or this energy, is in the body, but it is not of the body. If you like, the soul is in the body, but it is not of the same substance as the body. But it needs the actions of the body, or it can act with the body, so that therefore, the bodily aspect of me, or the faculties, my faculties, should try to hear what is it that the soul wants me to do. And gradually, can I assist its evolution by undertaking what it wants me to do? So, again and again, this suggestion that it is in the body, but it is not of the body. In fact, another thing that at a usual level I recommend to people to say, you see, there are three words which sometimes get more or less interchangeably used, but they all have slightly different action. The three words are attention, awareness, and consciousness. Sometimes they get interchangeably used by people, but attention almost always has the impression as if it is coming from me. When we use the word awareness, it is that I become aware of something, but it is not wholly coming from me. So already one feels a slight difference in the two. And the suggestion is that this consciousness actually belongs to the spiritual side. And on our side, by which I now mean the bodily side, we can have thinking, but thinking is not same as consciousness. Sometimes people this is why I'm saying that these words get mixed up. I can think about something, but whenever if I am actually conscious of something, that has a very different feeling connected with it. Thinking is coming from my own side, but to become even aware of something coming from another side. So consciousness belongs to not me, but I can nevertheless become aware of this. And therefore the suggestion that what can assist me to become aware of this more is, first of all, that I'm not wholly occupied with my thinking. So quieting the mind is almost a fundamental requirement. And also that very strong suggestion, actually, in fact, Sri Anirvan, whose name I mentioned, one of these great sages in India, he makes this remark that even the subtlest spiritual experience is a sensation in the body. Mind does not experience anything. Even in the scientific world, all the data or measurements that are being collected, that's not being collected by the mind. We see how high the thermometer is or the mercury is in the thermometer. In fact, the scientists can happily go home. It's the instruments which are collecting this data. So the reason I'm saying this, that often we get mixed up. Mind does not experience anything. All experience is by sensation or by feeling. So consequently, therefore, a very strong emphasis to cultivate more and more sensitive body, and subtler feeling, and clearer mind, silent mind. Otherwise, there is a bit of a tendency in some places as if the body doesn't matter. No, far from it. Deeper and deeper sensation, as I just quoted Sri Anurvan saying, even the highest or the subtlest spiritual experience is a sensation in the body. So, therefore, first of all, from our side, more and more emphasis on bringing the mind, the feeling, and the body closer and closer to each other, and deeper clarity, sensitivity, so that one can then be aware of this consciousness which is in the body but not of the body. I think partly because of the time, but we probably need to stop. In all of these conversations, I find them very helpful for me personally to learn something, and also we realize all of us are concerned about the state of the world, but it's not very clear what we can actually really do about it. But whenever we become at all clear, even who I vote for can be a relevant matter.
Thank you for saying that.
No, but isn't that true? Who I vote for or who I don't vote for, or which party, maybe in this case if it is a party who I contribute some funds to, all this can be relevant. So I do whatever I can do. But imagining that I could stop this war or do this and that, I think one is just wasting a lot of energy on that. It doesn't happen.
Yes, but we are very powerful beings, and we can continue to evolve into this deeper foundation of love.
Yes.
And create a blueprint for another world to birth. We're missing the reference point, but as more people evolve, we can establish
My
a new
impression
reference
is that
point.
this is almost the fundamental purpose of the Theosophical Society, or really any organization, which why have these kind of exchanges? Where do we have them?